From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. And now here's your host, Michael Fries.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. As part of our special report on workforce development in the trucking industry, we'll spend these next episodes speaking with industry professionals about people, issues, and trends that define its workforce. In this episode, we're exploring the dynamics involved with driver demand. What does it take to be a commercial driver? And what are schools doing to train these drivers? We'll set out to answer those questions in this episode. We'll take a look at the macro view of driver demand with Don Lefeve, CEO of the Commercial Vehicle Training Association, later. But first, let's take the micro view. We'd like to welcome our first guest, Chris Thropp, CEO, President of Sage Truck Driving School. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you on. Let's just take a moment to let you describe Sage Truck Driving School. Just give us a brief intro on the curriculum and what you provide students.
Sure. So Sage was started in 1989. We're actually based in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Harrisburg. The New Stanton School is one of our schools. We have about 25 truck driving schools across the country and about 180 employees, including staff and instructors. And the primary business is to provide CDL training, mostly for individuals who are just starting out in the trucking industry, but also for fleet driver training and contract training, special training, and we also are CDL testers, third-party CDL testers in multiple states. So the kind of the bottom line is we're a workforce training company, and we kind of consider our basic mission to be providing, comprehensive CDL training and job placement assistance, so that there are safe drivers on the road. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of what Sage is all about.
Okay. Now, you've been in this space for quite a while. What does it take to train a Class 8 driver? I guess I'm asking, what attributes would it take to be a Class 8 driver, a commercial driver?
Yeah, I mean, we have a very kind of wide selection of students who come to our school, men and women, people from all over the country. Because we're kind of geographically so spread out, we get people from the city who have never been around commercial vehicles. We get people who are, right off the farm, who have been driving tractors since they're, 8 years old. But, we're trying to attract people to this industry by providing information about the benefits of the industry. And there are many of them. But it does take someone, first of all, it's someone who wants to be in it, that they are willing to kind of adapt to the lifestyle of trucking. So lifestyle is always an issue. But the trucking industry has a lot to offer. And so we try and educate people on what the many benefits and advantages are. People have to have a good driving record. They have to be able to pass a drug screen, which has been a little bit of a challenge because of the states that have legalized marijuana. So they have to understand that that's not something that's allowed under federal rules, even if it's allowed by state. And I think you have to look for people who want to learn and are willing to work hard. It's obviously an industry where hard work is involved, and they're willing to kind of adapt to the lifestyle. So those are kind of some of the key things that we're looking for our students, so that they can succeed and so that we can provide good, safe drivers to the trucking industry.
What are some of the challenges in getting students in there? I mean, is there a challenge or?
Yeah, there are challenges. I say to people sometimes that, funding is probably one of the biggest challenges that the whole trucking industry has. In other words, how do people pay for truck driving school to start a new career? And it's somewhat difficult because you're telling people that this is a great industry, but you have to pay in order to get into it. And whether you go to a private truck driving school like ours, or you go to a carrier-based program, there is a cost involved to doing it. So that's kind of one of the things of trying to educate people, because the reality is that once you get your CDL, there's really a very big payback. There's a lot of job stability. There is a lot of job security. There are plenty of open positions, and you can use the CDL anywhere in a multitude of spaces within the transportation sector. But funding is an issue that we work on all the time. But of course, we work with students continually to try and find funding options for them. If they can't pay in cash, that there are grants and scholarships and loans and employer paid options. We're VA approved at all of our locations. So if you're a veteran, you can go there using your 9/11 GI Bill. And so there are a variety of funding sources, but I would say that's probably one of the biggest challenges. The other things that come into play are just kind of a student understanding what is the obligation of being a truck driver, especially an over-the-road driver, understanding the pay and benefits, just kind of getting an understanding of the responsibilities of a driver, the importance of safety, and things like that. But um, that's our job in terms of attracting students, is to try and convey all the benefits of trucking, because there are lots of advantages from all the pay, different types of pay and bonuses, all the insurance and vacation and retirement, and then all the kind of soft attributes of uh, being kind of independent in your position, and seeing the country, which is a lot of people really enjoy, and then opportunities for advancement and things like that. But it's got its challenges in terms of attracting people, but it's a great industry, and honestly, we have more people who want to go into this industry than can qualify to go in.
It's very interesting that you had mentioned funding, and as well as the attributes of having a job such as a driver being the room for advancement. And I think in trying to convey all those things, it's sort of a marketing message. Just correct me if I'm wrong. And then in that sense, you must do a lot of work with, with fleets and other logistical companies to make sure that they are getting the right types of drivers. Are you in those particular talks, or in having those particular partnerships with those companies?
Yeah, that we absolutely do. So a big part of running a truck driving school is really the kind of the workforce development, workforce training aspect of it. People don't get a CDL because they want to put a CDL in their wallet or in their pocket. They get it because they want to get a job. And so a huge part of what we do at Sage is related directly to job placement assistance. So we have very good relationships with great trucking companies across the country, whether they're all the major over the road companies, but also regional and some local jobs for people that are interested in doing that. And so we have partnerships with many of the major companies, and that's a very important aspect of running a truck driving school, is having those relationships where the trucking companies know that they're getting essentially a good product, a safe driver, someone who has been educated um, well enough to essentially be a co-driver, because the trucking companies they're entrusting them with a very large vehicle and expensive freight. So that whole job placement aspect of what we do is very, very important.
Transforce Group is your one-stop shop for carrier solutions. From driver development to carrier business needs, we are the number one choice to keep trucking firms on a path to growth. We offer innovative solutions in compliance and safety, digital recruiting, employment solutions such as driver and mechanic placement, and driver education and training. Transforce Group is here to help. Visit transforcegroup.com to get on the road to success today.
You were just explaining just the hurdles that you have to go through as a driving school, to make sure you get students, and also to make sure those students are well prepared when they enter the workforce. But one thing that's affected us all, no matter what profession, is the COVID-19 pandemic. It has probably hit your school hard in the sense of just delaying classes and closing for a while. Can you just talk us through that particular moment and describe the steps that you took to get through it?
Sure. Well, it has obviously had an impact on our business. I mean, on our customers and on students and costs. So we were shut down for a couple months, and that varied by state, which made it kind of difficult. That different states were making different decisions, but um, there have been some challenges in terms of operating with the health concerns. But we've essentially um, put in place the CDC recommended guidelines. So everybody's wearing a mask, and we're trying to social distance and keep students separated. The one interesting thing about our program, the just in terms of how we deliver the CDL training, is all of our training is done with one student per truck. It always has been. So most schools are putting 3 or 4 students in a truck when they go out on the road. We have always only had the instructor and one student in the truck. So that made that kind of social distancing much easier because we were used to doing that. Whereas a lot of schools had to figure out, how do we, instead of being 4 to 1 in a truck, how do we go to 1 to 1 in a truck? Whereas we've been doing that for a long time. But we just had to add different procedures for temperature checks and cleaning and testing where that's required. Recruiting changed significantly. There really are not visits by recruiters at this point. For the most part, most of the recruiting is done by Zoom, which I think is, it's hard. The other big issue that we've had, just in operating the schools, is the shutdown of so many of the departments of motor vehicles. So it's difficult getting students in to get a permit knowledge test, get them in to actually get their CDL once they pass the CDL test, and also to make arrangements for CDL testing when it's done by the state. So those have been some challenges, but we're holding our own. We're getting through this. We've got some great employees who are just really focused on continuing to do a good job and solving problems and dealing with the situation, and that has made all the difference in the world.
Well, that makes the most difference in adapting to change. That's the one thing in this pandemic that most industries are trying to navigate through, where having to work with regulations and having those supply chains, I guess, slowed down by this crisis, that really puts a wrench into the system. Uh, Pandemic aside, what are some of the things that you would like to see in driver training that haven't been to fruition yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's there are going to be changes coming, and I the biggest change that we're going to see, which I don't there's some uncertainty connected to it, is the new entry level driver training rule. So that was supposed to go into effect in February of 2020 because of the pandemic and because of some technological issues that FMCSA had. That has now been delayed until February of 2022. But that's going to be a kind of a game changer, because it's going to really change the whole paradigm as to how CDL training is done, because schools will have to be approved by FMCSA and be on the training provider registry. They're going to have to verify that all the theory training topics and all of the proficiency um, determinations have been done in terms of skills. So I can't say that that's something that I wanted, but generally I think it's good. I think that the new entry level rules are going to kind of give some uniformity across the country, because essentially anyone who wants to get a CDL is going to have to go through that unapproved program. So that's kind of one of the biggest changes that's going on. I would like to see funding expanded, because I do think that working in the trucking industry is really a very good job for a lot of people. And if we can make that available to more people, I think that would be good for the economy, good for individuals, and good for the trucking companies.
I'm sorry, Chris. When you say funding, you mean scholarships, grants, and things like that?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yes, I'm talking about, ways to pay for trucking company, essentially workforce development funds that help people get into this industry. Because we see the successes all the time of people who are making minimum wage, people who, are underemployed or unemployed. And the reality is, if, for example, if you're you're in construction and you're making $25,000 a year, you go to truck driving school and you can, overnight almost double your income and get something that gives you job security. So we see amazing stories of people who have gone to work and it's changed their life. And we get drivers that come back. They bring their brand new, gleaming truck, and they drive up to our school. And our other students are just amazed that what an impact that has had.
It's really great to hear those success stories. I'm thinking, Chris, that's what keeps you. That's one of the things that keeps you in this industry.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's the impact that you have on people every day. I mean, as I said, there are just people who come to us who are they're on their last dime. They don't really know where to go. They don't know what to do. They need help. Maybe they've struggled. Maybe they've just kind of muddled along. They don't have an education, and this is something that, with a relatively short training horizon, can turn someone into essentially a middle class income within a matter of weeks. And there are not many training programs that can do that. Now, that's not to say that it's for everybody, but for the people that it's appropriate for, it can make a huge difference. And that's really, I think it's what really kind of drives our people to see that kind of success and those kind of life-changing turnarounds.
We've been speaking with Chris Thropp, CEO, President of Sage Truck Driving School. Chris, it was a pleasure having you on.
Thanks, Mike. My pleasure to be here.
Looking to transition logistics personnel into top CDL drivers? Look no further than Transforce Group. With state-of-the-art training and testing facilities, our CDL schools are nationally recognized as the highest quality, full-service commercial driving schools. We also offer customizable e-learning options for your drivers. Visit transforcegroup.com/education and training to learn more.
We took a look at the micro view with Chris Thropp. Now let's take a look at the macro view of driver demand and education with Don Lefeve, President and CEO of the Commercial Vehicle Training Association. Welcome to the show, Don.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Great to have you on. One of the things, if this was a regular year, I would talk to you about, some of the trends that you're seeing in the labor force, but this is not an ordinary year. So I want to start this off with how the pandemic is impacting, driver education. And what's it like for the instructors, schools, just kind of what you're seeing from the 10,000 foot view that you have?
Great question. And thanks, Mike. I would say the pandemic has changed many things about truck driver training. First, we have to follow CDC guidelines, which means it's changed how we train. Social distancing has really changed the way we teach in the classroom or in the cab of a truck. So whereas, let's say, in a normal year, we would do, let's say, 3 or 4 students in the cab for road training and rotated them, we're really seeing more like one-on-one training or 2-to-1. Now, this doesn't change the amount of seat time the student receives, but it really has changed the method the school has to employ. I would also say, second, we're seeing the need to add additional instructors. Which again may limit the number of students that can be taught. So finding instructors pre-COVID was, somewhat tough, but it's even tougher now to find those willing to teach, but also meet the experience that the schools require. So schools that are having problem, finding or adding instructors are therefore kind of limited to existing capacity that each instructor can handle. And then in terms of how is the pandemic impact driver training? I think it's important for listeners to understand that we're certainly seeing a renewed interest in students looking to become truck drivers. But there are problems in many states in that the states or their state driver's license agency, which is really a DMV, is unable to keep pace with the demand. So right now, we're seeing about 17 states that have pretty extensive delays And the delays are really coming to get an appointment in the commercial learner's permit written exam. It could be a delay to get a CDL skills test or a delay to really get the physical CDL issued. And the reasons kind of vary in each state, where or why these problems are occurring. But it's really typically the result of the supply of appointments that a DMV can offer, and really what it amounts to is folks are taking longer to get licensed. So appointments in many of those 17s are booked out 30, 60, sometimes 90 days. So imagine if you're trying to get trained, but you got to wait 30 or 60 days just to get an appointment for your commercial learner's permit written exam. That could be very problematic for the student or the school to get them enrolled and trained and then out with their CDL license. So, the same delay really applies to, in some states, the CDL skills exam or the physical licensing. So, if you have, 30 or 60 days to get your CLP, 30 or 60 days to get your CDL skills test, or 30 days, to get your physical CDL, I mean, that's just adding months and months of time onto the process. So we're just seeing it's not a lack of interest. It's just a lack of ability to really, translate that into licensed drivers.
There's a lot of effects with the pandemic having to do with the regulations of things that you had just described. But I kind of want to go back to what you were saying earlier with the deficit of instructors. Is that something that has been just pandemic related, or was that an underlying symptom that the pandemic just exposed?
A little of both, I would say. And when talking to schools, not every school faces that problem, right? But I think it is somewhat pandemic driven. It was an issue as things got tighter, depending on the year. If the market was tighter, instructors, would oftentimes consider going back out to driving, because they could make more money doing that. With the pandemic, I think what you're seeing is some fear of, exposing themselves, particularly if they're an older instructor. They may be hesitant to get in the cab with an individual. But also capacity, for the most part right now is pretty tight. So, perhaps they're getting better offers, from trucking companies. So it's a combination of both. Again, not every school faces that scenario, but those that do, are trying to find the, instructors to add additional capacity, because we're certainly seeing more interest in trucking as a career.
This pandemic has kind of thrown everything into the mixer of life. But pandemic aside, if we didn't have COVID-19 during the beginning of the year, what are some of the trends that you were seeing from the beginning of the year that you would think that will persist later concerning the labor force, drivers in detail?
Yeah, I think earlier in the year, the economy was so hot, it was trying to get folks interested in trucking as a career. What was the unemployment rate? Somewhere in like 3.5%, basically. So I think it got down to 3.5, maybe 3.6. So training schools typically are countercyclical. So we tend to have fewer leads when the economy is really hot, and that just becomes really due to a number of reasons. But somebody could really be in construction, not driving. Somebody's looking to get out into a career and there's very low unemployment. Well, there are opportunities more likely around their where they live, so that they're not going into trucking. But as the pandemic came on, what we've seen is that there's a renewed interest, and that's not unsurprising because the unemployment rate has gone up. So I think when we started off this year, still maintaining like we had, I think last year, it wasn't as hot. But then when the pandemic hit, we saw the price of freight kind of, bottom out. And now we're coming back into a scenario where we're not seeing as many drivers enter the market. And I think what that's going to translate to, first, obviously, what we're seeing, capacity crunch, but that's only, I think, going to extend well into 2021. One, because of the, state driver's license agencies and the inability to get drivers tested or licensed, the social distancing guidelines, are obviously having some impact. But I think that we're kind of, right now we're about to hit peak season, and we're already seeing a capacity crunch, which I think is even going to be furthered by peak season. So, I think there's kind of a big X factor, which is, what are the experienced drivers doing? Obviously a number of them are continuing to drive, but new drivers alone can't make up, for experienced drivers that have gotten out of the market. So I suspect that some of those have either retired or taken more local driving jobs. But we'll have to, that remains to be seen. But what we are certainly seeing is more and more carriers kind of rejecting freight because, the prices aren't there, and to meet that demand.
That's a great segue to my next question, Don. Let's get a little more analytical, I guess. In late May, Dan Ronan had written a feature concerning the driver shortage and it being over temporarily. And he had quoted you in that, and you had said that you believe that the driver's market will tighten later this year once the economy gets momentum. Just asking you to put on your analyst hat or magic ball, whichever you prefer, in your assessment. It is now mid-September. Do you think that's coming to bear?
I do. I do, because you don't flip a magic switch and just produce drivers overnight. And it really takes 2 to 3 months to get a driver, not only through CDL school or truck driver training school, but it also takes additional time to get drivers through what's major carriers have, which is called finishing school, which is additional training that the carrier will give to an individual to give them more experience. And typically they have to meet certain performance measures by that carrier before they can go solo. So when you look at the impacts of where we were coming off of, the March, April, May timeline, well, the market has really obviously increased demand in terms of interest in the occupation, but you still have had a number of states that were dysfunctional, either closed or severe delays, really since April. And now, just to give your listeners some perspective, there are a number of states that really have just been operating as normal, and things are going very well in those states. But we're coming off of, at one point in April, having 27 DMVs shut down. That started to thaw more in, let's say, May. But then you have a new problem, which is this backlog due to getting appointments. And it's just delaying the process for individuals to get into the market. So in terms of how that applies to capacity crunch, you've seen freight bottom out, but in April, but now the freight's not only coming back, but we're about to enter peak season. So, if you're looking at where we're going to be, 2 to 3 months from now, your drivers are probably about, let me think. So in about 40% of the states, they're still facing delays. And it's just, again, it's if freight is going to continue to kind of improve, but your drivers are staying constant or being delayed because it takes 2 to 3 months to get them not only licensed, but really through finishing school, that's going to have a major impact. I suspect that you'll see, rates go up. I suspect you'll see driver pay go up. And it's not going to stop just this year. It's going to continue into 2021.
Yeah, that was my next question. Just kind of that bottleneck that's happening because of the pandemic. But with the driver pay going up, I think that would be a good thing for those wanting to get into the industry. And you're saying that that's going to continue next year. Is that going to dry up in that same year, or is that something that's going to be sustainable for years on?
That really remains to be kind of the big question mark. I will tell you, I read recently where one CEO anticipated that it could likely last well into 2021 for sure. So, I think that remains to be seen. But if at one point drivers were off and have been off, I think this year between, let's call it 30 to 40%. So if you are delaying drivers from getting into the market, but the freight still, maintains its current course, I think that has to translate into freight price increases and driver pay.
Just for our listeners, the last two questions, we were just referencing the article "Driver Shortage is Over Temporarily" by Dan Ronan, available on ttnews.com. We were speaking with Don Lefeve, President and CEO of the Commercial Vehicle Training Association. Yeah, Don, I think we've exhausted the questions that I wanted to ask, and I appreciate you coming on, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Did you know you can ask Alexa to open Transport Topics? In just 1 minute, you will hear the biggest trucking headlines of that day. Be prepared and start your morning off right with Transport Topics.
Before we close, let's take a moment to revisit our original questions. What does it take to become a commercial driver? What are schools doing to train these drivers? As we've heard from our guests, truck driving is definitely a job one really wants to do. You're driving long distances away from your family and loved ones. It takes a unique set of attributes and, of course, skill. As for training, schools continually work with fleets in producing the right type of commercial driver who will, no pun intended, hit the ground running once in the workforce. But in addition, we've learned that this pandemic has put a bit of a strain in the process. Unfortunately, as new drivers finish their training, they're caught in a bottleneck, which in some states has slowed the CDL registration process. Even as the economy recovers and we grow into this new normal, these problems will persist for some time. If you enjoyed this episode of Road Signs, please let others know. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. If my questions have sparked questions of your own, share them with the Road Signs team or reach me on Twitter at Michael V. Freeze. You can email us at share@tdnews.com. We'll read them and respond daily. And of course, we'll be back in 2 weeks with more of our special report on workforce development. Until then, I'm Michael Freeze. Thank you for listening.